This is another Eager to Know episode from the past. This one is all about yoga and meditation. When I was living in Chicago, I regularly went to a yoga class, and my teacher, Lance, who was wonderful, agreed to chat with me after class one time. And as you'll hear, the interview was done in the studio, so it's very echoey. If you are very curious about yoga or meditation, I encourage you to listen to this full episode because Lance gives some great insight into a meditation practice. So I am pleased to share my conversation with Lance. All right, so I am here with Lance, and we just finished our yoga class. Lance is the instructor at the yoga studio that I go to at least once a week. So I am feeling my muscles are like all stimulated and excited. So that's a good thing. So we decided that we were going to record this interview. So I said, let's just do it after class. So things may sound a bit echoey, but that's because we're in the yoga studio. Now, when you teach a class, is that do you consider that like a regular yoga practice for you, or do you not count that? Do you have to go and practice on your own?
Yeah, I don't count teaching a class as a yoga practice. I do my own practice on my own. Yep.
Okay. Now, how often do you practice on your own?
It depends on my activity level that week. If I'm teaching a lot of classes, sometimes I actually don't do a physical practice. If I'm not teaching a lot of classes, I'll do a couple of practices a week.
Okay. Tell me about what yoga, how that fits into your life right now. Are you just teaching? Is that just teaching classes and then you practice it? Is that the extent of what yoga is in your life right now?
That's the biggest part of yoga right now in my life, but I do have a daily meditation practice. The first thing I do when I wake up in the morning is I meditate. And that's, technically part of the yoga practice as well. So that's an important part of my life.
Okay. Well, all right. I didn't know that. When we did our pre-interview, you didn't mention the meditation part. So that's really important. I want to know about how you got into yoga. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, it was a VHS back in the early 90s. A friend of mine bought it, and we started doing yoga in the living room. And then shortly after, the gym started offering it, and so I started going to classes at the gym.
When you first did yoga, did it activate your brain immediately? Did you feel a connection to it?
I did, actually. Memory, I don't even think I even knew what yoga was when my friend brought the VHS over, and it was absolute instant connection. I just felt like this was amazing. Yeah.
Can you describe what it was about it? Because I assume that you had experience in physical fitness and probably stretching. What was it about yoga that was obviously something different than you had experienced?
Yeah, it was the way my body felt. Just being able to move the entire body through an hour practice, and just feeling how energetic I felt after the practice. Where oftentimes in workouts, you're exhausted and tired afterwards, and I didn't feel that. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's why I had mentioned, that was one of the first things I said when we started talking today. And because when I started doing yoga, I felt the same way, that I couldn't believe that my body felt energized and activated. When I was a kid, I used to do gymnastics, and you would work out and you would feel fatigued. And with yoga, you really don't. And it affects your spirit a little bit as well. When you first started doing those VHS tapes and you were feeling this, this energized feeling in your muscles, in your body, was there a mental part of it? Because, we touched on the fact that meditation is closely related to yoga. Had that even entered into the picture initially?
No, it took a number of years before I realized that meditation and yoga were actually part of the same umbrella practice, if you will. To me at the time, it was just a physical practice.
I first started taking yoga back in probably around 2000, 2000, 2001, 2002. And I was looking to do two things. I was looking to improve my flexibility because I'm naturally not flexible. I'm very tight. And number two, I wanted to do something to help with stress. And I somehow stumbled on to yoga, and I couldn't believe that there was a thing that did exactly those two things.
Likewise, as far as flexibility, I have to work on my flexibility. There are other aspects of yoga that I'm really natural at, like balancing. I can balance, my balance poses are really good, but flexibility I have to work on. I think it was a combination of, using the entire body and feeling your body as you went through a practice. It was like just amazing to me how it felt.
This is kind of a big question, but what would you say yoga does for people?
I think that, people come into yoga with different expectations. I think people come into yoga with the expectation of a workout where they're going to develop strength, they're going to develop flexibility, and I think that's great. I think a lot of people come into yoga because it's a reprieve from everyday life, right? They have an opportunity to stop doing what they're doing. They can take time out for themselves. It makes their body feel good. It also makes their mind feel good. If you're practicing properly, you keep your mind in the present moment and you stop worrying about everything that's going on in your life. And I actually think that is a hidden gem with yoga. I don't think a lot of people come into yoga class realizing that. I think they come in expecting a workout and they don't understand why they're leaving feeling the way they feel because it doesn't occur to them that they've been present for the last 90 minutes.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And my opinion, certainly not expert opinion, is that the reason why that happens is because a lot of these poses are so physically challenging that you really can't think of anything else. So you kind of forget about all of your worries that you had all day and you're focusing on your pigeon and kind of how it hurts, kind of training your brain to focus on one thing and displacing all the other things, I think is really important. So I guess it is kind of a side effect, but I think if people are aware of that going into a practice, or that I think it can help develop that part of your brain. I think that it's helpful if you do it regularly in concentration and focus and focusing on one thing.
Right. We always laugh in our culture about the ability to multitask. And science has proven that time and time again that all we are actually doing is going from one thing, we're flipping back and forth. We're not actually multitasking. The brain doesn't actually multitask like that. But we find ourselves feeling proud of ourselves when we accomplish two tasks similar at the same time. And what yoga does is it stops that multitasking. It brings us right into the present moment. Like you said, there's so many things to think about: what the body's doing, what muscles are we working, what are the joints, are the joints doing the right thing? Are we taking deep breaths while we're at it? That we don't have time to do anything else. We don't have time to do other multitasking. And I think that's why it brings us right into the present moment and keeps us here. Yep.
Yeah. Something else about yoga that I think is wonderful, it's a never-ending journey for you. It's something that you'll never master. So as long as you can be comfortable with that, you kind of have your own little adventure and you have it's your own practice where you can just focus on getting better and better. And you're always going to get better as long as you keep working at it. And that's wonderful. It's not like something where I mastered it and I'm done. Kind of like snowboarding. I always bring up snowboarding. But snowboarding is something that you can kind of master it pretty quickly. Like it's really hard once you start. But once you kind of get it, you're like, okay, I'm a snowboarder. I can do it. Yoga is more like painting. Where like painting, you're always going to grow and develop. And as a painter, I never have to worry about, I figured it out, I'm done. It's the same thing with yoga. I know that it's just always going to be a challenge. the things that I see you do in class, like there's no way I would ever be able to do them. And I am completely fine with that, but I can keep working towards them.
The first thing I like to bring up in class when we're doing a pose, especially a pose that's hard for the majority of class, is to set the ego aside, right? To not, you don't have to look like that person on the cover of Yoga Journal, right? You're going to look like you look because you're not the same body as that person. And so we have to learn to set our ego aside and practice, like you said. It's a continual practice. You do what you can, and what you can't do, you set aside for that particular day. The other thing that I like to joke about with my students in class is kind of like you mentioned with snowboarding, but I always say, you always hear a teacher say yoga practice. Whether you read about yoga, whether you hear about yoga, whether you talk about yoga, we go to a yoga practice. Never ever have you ever heard a yoga recital. It doesn't happen, right? It's always a yoga practice.
We talked about how, when you're in these challenging poses, you can only think about one thing, which kind of leads into meditation. But why don't you tell me about if you don't mind, can you talk about your meditation practice and how that relates to yoga and if it does?
So I would consider my meditation practice part of my yoga practice. So does it relate to my physical yoga practice, the asanas, doing the poses? Absolutely. Being present. So when I wake up in the morning, I sit down to meditate. It's for 20 minutes. And my goal is to absolutely be present. I have no expectations. I don't expect to feel anything. I don't want to think about anything. I want to just notice my body, feel my body. If it's cold, if it's hot, are there birds outside? Is there a garbage truck outside? Is a siren going by? Those things are awareness of the present moment. So it's not, I'm not trying to achieve, I don't have a goal to get to nirvana because that will happen at the right time.
What about your thoughts when you're doing your meditation? What happens with all the things that are going on in your brain?
My mind's quiet. No, not at all. I'm always, that's why it's a meditation practice. I get caught in a storyline, whatever it might be. Maybe I'm trying to make plans for the day, and the minute I realize I'm doing that, I just come back to my breath, or I come back to that noise that's brought me out of that storyline, and I stay present again. And then pretty soon I wander off, and when I realize it, I come back to the inhale or the exhale. I like to light a candle, so oftentimes I will stare at the candle to help keep my thoughts present, but that doesn't always work. Sometimes my mind wanders again.
And why do you think this is helpful to people to do something like that?
With practice on meditation like this, to become absolutely present, when we find ourselves in difficult or challenging situations, something doesn't go right. It could be something as easy as you get caught in the rain. Maybe you're in a fender bender. Maybe you didn't get that promotion, or maybe your neighbor starts yelling at you. Whatever the case may be. If you have a practice of sitting still and being present, then when situations in life that come up that throw you off or catch you off guard, you are more able to stop and to act accordingly based on the situation instead of reacting about the situation. It's the reacting that causes anger and confusion and fear, and acting accordingly can only be done if your mind is able to be present.
Okay, so I am now remembering when I first started doing yoga. I had forgotten about this, and I learned exactly that. Not for meditation, but getting back to yoga, because it was the first time that I had been in a situation where I had to hold these poses that were painful, and I had to focus on my breathing and stay with not necessarily pain, but a little bit of discomfort, and I just had to stay with it because we had to hold the pose. And I remember I kind of started to change my brain a little bit to stay in a discomforting situation and focusing on breathing. And I remember applying that to my life. This is back when I first started yoga, and I had totally forgotten about that.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. I don't, whether it's a painful pose, and again, painful, whether it's a deep sensation pose, like pigeon pose or something like that, or even if it's a balance pose, tree pose or balancing warrior or half moon, when we hold those poses, if we can stay present and if we can accept what's happening in the pose, that allows us to do that. The term is often being called when you take yoga off the mat, and you do that in your everyday life.
Yeah. So I just wanted to share with you, I'm not a huge meditator, but what I do, and I would like to hear what you think about it, because I used to try to do the situation where you would have a thought and let it go and just try to have like your brain be static. And I figured like this isn't going to happen. Like my brain is too active. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be okay with my active brain and all of these thoughts, but I'm going to be sitting in a movie theater and watching them on the screen. So I'm removing myself from them. So I'm trying not to get the emotional activation in the brain, because this is what happens with, I'm sure most people, but it happens with me. I will have a thought and I will get an anxiety response. It's like a thought of the past, or I'll worry, and I literally will my heart will start racing. And what I try to do in the meditation is I try to just remove myself from it. Like I am sitting in a movie seat and watching it on the screen.
Yeah, that's a very common practice in, watching your thoughts float by and not being attached to them. And that's the biggest thing or that's the biggest challenge we have, is getting attached to those emotions that come up because of absolute irrelevant thoughts in our mind. I think that there are so many different ways to meditate out there. Like if you just type in meditation, in a Google search, you're going to get at least 150 different hits and different styles and different concepts. And I think that it's important for people to find the concept and the style that works for them. So you found the idea of, working on imagining that you're in a movie theater, so you're not attached to those thoughts. That's one way to do it. I think for people, if you sit down and think that you're going to stop your mind from thinking, you should change that thought, because that's never going to happen. I've heard people say, well, you just have to quiet the mind. And how do you define quiet the mind? That's a tough one. I would say more of watching, like you said, watching the mind versus trying to quiet the mind. I think there's a big difference there. Yeah.
I guess I feel like a lot of things that come into my brain, and I'm assuming everybody else's brain, are valid. They are valid worries. And a lot of things that I worried about in my past actually really happened. And I wish I hadn't worried about them. I wish I had just processed them in a way so I could have been better prepared. Or I wish I wasn't overwhelmed by anxiety and emotion from them, and so that I could have handled things that really ultimately may have happened. I'm not saying that everything happened, but I do think that I don't like to write off worries that I have as being completely ridiculous and irrelevant, and don't think about that.
Anxiety is ultimately just fear. And when we talk about should we worry about something or not, we have to define what worry means. Do we create a storyline that may or may never come true, or do we look at the facts? The example that comes to mind is, let's say that you're filing for bankruptcy, and you're creating these storylines that you're going to lose your house, and you're going to lose your car, and you're going to lose your job, and you're going to end up homeless on the street and cold. That's a storyline. The reality is, okay, on Monday I go to the bank and I sign the papers. On Tuesday I go back to work just like every other day, and I'm going to take Wednesday. I'm going to go back to work. Same thing on Thursday. Same thing on Friday. So there's a difference between planning out things that are going to be coming up versus worrying, which is creating those storylines that. Usually that's just all they are storylines. They're not the actual truth.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
The other thing to always remember when you're in a situation, whether it's comfortable or not comfortable, right? We could go either way with those situations, is to be present and to make sure that you respond in the present moment and that your reactions, keyword there, reactions, are not based on solid emotions. You want to be present when you have to act on something, when you have to make a decision. Your decisions will be right in that particular case.
Before you discovered yoga, were you having, like most people, were you behaving in a way where your emotions were getting the best of you and driving your behaviors?
I would say probably the answer is yes. As I'm thinking back I think like almost every childhood, you're taught by your parents and you're taught by your neighborhood and your culture of how to react to things. And, in our culture, we tend to react or even overreact to a lot of simple things. And I think I was following that path like most other people. And, I'm not sure, in all honesty, now that you ask me that, I feel like at some point there was a slow shift. It didn't happen overnight. I'm still working on it, 20 years later. But I think that there was a shift happening where I realized that by responding, I worked retail, and so I had to deal with irate customers. And I think that I realized by responding in the present moment, so I'm not accusing them, I'm listening to them, and I make sure that they understand that I'm listening to them, and then I'm, either making a decision or responding to them in the present moment. The situations got resolved a lot easier than if I reacted to their reaction.
Do you think something like this, the sense of mindfulness and being in the present moment, is that something that is taught in schools in a different way that I'm not aware of? Or,
in my opinion, nothing. We are absolutely not taught this at all in any way, shape, form, or fashion.
Okay.
To my knowledge.
Okay. I know obviously it wasn't explicitly taught to me, but I wasn't sure if it maybe was an intention of like an academic curriculum in elementary school that I just wasn't aware of.
Yeah, not to my knowledge. I think a lot of times when you talk about things like this, I know that I get pushback from people. Oh, well, that's just esoteric, or oh, that's just mumbo jumbo, or that's not true and it can't be proven. So no, I don't think that this is taught, to my knowledge, in any form at any school.
Because this to me seems something very foundational.
Agreed.
This seems very foundational, that having the ability to be mindful and stay in the moment and not reacting, I feel like that would be helpful to everybody. I think you would get better results in whatever you're trying to do.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I know that there are schools out there, there are school districts out there that have tried in the past, and maybe they're still doing it, where they're trying to incorporate meditation into the curriculum somehow. Whether it's in the morning when school starts, or maybe midday, who knows. But I feel like there's the same number of schools or school districts that are like banning this because they feel like it's a religious influence of some way, and so
I guess I wasn't necessarily thinking that meditation would be the actual way to accomplish it. I don't know. I'm just thinking having the end result, however you turn that into a curriculum. I don't know if there's another option besides meditation. I mean, honestly, I feel like young boys, I know what I was like in elementary school, and I was so hyperactive. There's no way that meditation would have worked for me, but I'm sure they could come up with something, something that potentially, and I think that sports is probably related to that because it's a physical way where you have to stay focused, in the same way that we talked about holding the pose and being discomfort and having to focus on your breathing, etc. I think when you're in a team sport, it's the same way. Like you are probably having to, you can't be thinking about anything else and you have to be focused. What would you tell people that are listening to this who are considering meditation or yoga?
Yeah. I think the number one thing that I tell everybody is whether you're trying yoga, whether you're trying meditation, whether you're trying a combination of them, is to read up on teachers, read up on styles, find the one that resonates best with you, and even once you find something that resonates with you, see if you can find different teachers, because like everything, you might like one thing, but you have to resonate with your teacher, whatever it may be. Not everybody likes their piano teacher, not everybody likes their coach, but then they change something and they get a new coach or they get a new, music teacher and they like that person. So don't try it once and give up. Make sure that you find a teacher that you resonate with. I think that's most important.
Okay, great. All right, Lance, well, first of all, thank you for a wonderful class tonight. Yeah. That was amazing.
My pleasure.
And I've been coming, we're now post-COVID, we're back. Yeah. So I've been coming once a week. So I'm actually, I hadn't done any yoga during COVID because I didn't really like the online stuff very much. So I'm now, my body is getting back into it, and that feels good.
Yeah, good. So, I'm glad to hear that. Yeah.
And obviously, thank you for hanging out after class and talking to me.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. My name is Ricky McGuckran, and you have been listening to Eager to Know, the podcast. If you haven't already, please go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. Join me next week for another Eager to Know podcast.